Hi, and welcome to another video tutorial. In this video tutorial, what I'm going to be doing is showing you how to handle errors in your Python programs. And this is just basically explaining how you handle bits of code that might cause an error but might not. So what's an example of this then? Well, a simple example would be entering an integer and printing it out to the screen. So take a look at this code here. What I've got is a line which takes in a value, converts it into an integer, and stores it in the variable int input. It then converts this to a string on the second line and prints it out to the screen. So if I run this code now, it will ask me to enter a number, so I'm going to enter 30, and it prints it out to the screen, and that's all very well, that works. But what happens if I run it and I enter a string? It gives me an error, and it gives me a value error. What that means is the type of string that it read in here is not what it expected when it passed it into the int function here. So it wasn't able to convert computing tutor into an integer because the string computing tutor doesn't have any equivalent integer that you could possibly convert it into. So how can we handle this then? Well, what we do is we use something called a TryBlock. So we type try, and we put the code, this code here, that might fail in the try block. Then what we do is use an except, and we type the name of the error that occurred when we found that the program might fail. So the name of this error here is value error. So we type that, and then a colon at the end. And then in this except block, what we do is we type the code that we want to run if the error occurs. So what I'm going to do is print out to the screen, you didn't enter an integer. So you didn't enter an integer. So let's try running this code again then with the same two test cases that we just did. So let's type in 30, still runs as we would expect. So let's try typing in computing tutor now. And it prints to the screen, you didn't enter an integer. So we can see there that we've stopped the program from crashing, and we've actually printed out a useful error message for the user so they know what they did wrong. So let's try another example then. In this example code here, what I've got is the code to read in two integers from the user, and a line which divides one integer by the other and stores it in the variable result, and then a line which prints out that result to the user. So let's try running this now. So I'm going to enter 12 divided by 2, and it prints out 6. So that's working as we would expect. But what happens if we enter a string as one of the inputs? We get a value error like we did with the last program. But with this program, there's also another error that might occur. What happens if we enter 0 as as one of the inputs? So we enter 12, but we enter 0, so we try to divide 12 by 0. We get a 0 division error. So we've got two errors that might occur with this piece of code here. And so how do we manage that? Well, what we do is, just like with the other example, we use a try block for the code that might fail. Then we write except, and then value error. And this block of code here after the except is going to handle what happens when a value error occurs. So I'm just going to print out you didn't enter a number. And then what we can do is we can have another except block, and this will handle what happens if a 0 division error occurs. And what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to type you tried to divide by 0. So let's see what happens if we run our code now. If we type 12 divided by 2, we get 6 as normal, so that works. What happens if we enter a string as one of our numbers? We type 12 divided by hello. You didn't enter a number, so that's given the user there a relevant error message, so they know what they did wrong, because we were able to handle the individual error there. And you'll see what happens if we run it and type 12 divided by 0. We get the error message, you tried to divide by 0. So using these multiple except blocks to handle individual errors is one way that you can provide useful error messages to your users when you're writing programs. You may also come across programs that are badly written, and they are written like this, and they use an except block like this. And this will work, but the problem with this is that if you have a well-written program in the TryBlock, then it will work fine, and it will just print incorrect input, and that's not very useful compared to the error messages that we got here, but it will still work. But if you have a badly written program, so we take out this this conversion to an integer here, and we try to run this now, let's see what happens. So if we type 12 divided by 20 divided by 2, the program prints out incorrect input. But I've entered 12 divided by 2, it should be correct. Well, that's because this catch-all except block is masking the fact that I've forgotten to convert the second input into an integer. So this is why you really should avoid using these catch-all except blocks, because they can hide errors that you've made in your actual program, and it makes the user think that they've done something wrong when in actual fact they've actually used the program correctly. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this tutorial video on exceptions. There is another thing you can do with exceptions, and that's use something called a finally block. And what I'll show you is a good use of a finally block when I do a video tutorial on reading and writing to text files. But what the finally block basically does is, regardless of whether your try block has executed successfully or whether there's been an exception, the code in the finally block always executes. So that's what the finally block is used for. Any code that you want to execute, regardless of whether your try block runs successfully or not. Okay, so I hope you found this tutorial useful, and thanks for watching.